forever. But Sister Evangeline's story doesn't end with personal crisis of faith. Her knowledge, her terrible understanding of what the Emperor truly is, leads her to places where even her darkest suspicions prove inadequate to the horror of reality. The fifth revelation comes through an Inquisitor. Inquisitor Covenant Vraxxis of the Ordo Hereticus arrives at Sister Evangeline's order without warning, his authority absolute, his purpose initially unclear. He requests private audience with her, and requests from Inquisitors are never really requests. They're commands wrapped in courtesy that fools no one. They meet in one of the Order's private chapels, Evangeline expecting interrogation about her investigations, prepared for accusations of heresy, ready to accept whatever punishment comes from her dangerous scholarship. Instead, Vraxxis speaks words that shatter her remaining assumptions about how the Imperium actually functions. You've been asking dangerous questions, sister, accessing restricted texts, drawing conclusions that most minds can't bear. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to recruit you. Sister Evangeline maintains careful neutrality, unsure whether this is trap or genuine offer. Vraxxis continues. You think you've discovered terrible secret about the Emperor's nature. You think you're alone in knowing that faith is transaction, that worship feeds something that may not be capable of benevolence. You think the Ecclesiarchy is hiding truth from faithful who couldn't handle knowing it. You're wrong. Not about the Emperor's nature. You're correct there, terribly correct. But about being alone in knowing. The Inquisition, the highest levels of the administratum, the senior Ecclesiarchy hierarchy, the chapter masters of first founding chapters. We all know, have always known. The truth isn't suppressed because it's hidden, it's suppressed. Because there are truths worse than what you've discovered, and revealing even the first layer would collapse everything. He lets this settle, watching her process the implications. You think the Emperor is trapped in agony, that he consumes rather than protects, that faith feeds hunger rather than receiving blessing. All true, but incomplete. You haven't asked the crucial question, what happens if we stop feeding him? Sister Evangeline had assumed the answer was obvious. If the Emperor dies, the Astronomicon fails, warp travel becomes impossible. Humanity's interstellar empire collapses into isolated worlds that fall one by one to chaos, xenos, or simple starvation. Vraxxis shakes his head. That would be the merciful outcome. The actual consequence is far worse. He produces a data slate. Authorization seals marking it as classified beyond anything Sister Evangeline has accessed before. This is compiled from psychers who've survived touching the Emperor's consciousness. Fragments of what they experienced before their minds broke or they were consumed. Read it. The document is fragmentary, often contradictory, clearly assembled from accounts given by individuals experiencing extreme psychological trauma. But certain themes repeat with disturbing consistency. The Emperor is not simply trapped on the throne. He's anchored there, his psychic presence bound to the physical universe through mechanisms that go beyond technology or sorcery into territory where those distinctions become meaningless. If he dies, truly dies, his consciousness dissipated and psychic presence eliminated, the anchor breaks. And when the anchor breaks, something that's been held back for 10,000 years will be released. The accounts describe it variously: a rift in reality, a tearing of the warp's membrane, a hole in existence itself centered on Terra. They describe the Emperor not just as consuming faith, but as actively fighting something, using all his consciousness and all the power fed to him by sacrificed psychers to maintain barrier between reality and something that makes chaos look benign by comparison. One account describes it as the truth behind the universe, capital letters carefully preserved in the original text. Another calls it the reason reality shouldn't exist. A third simply states, if the Emperor stops holding it back, everyone understands why we should never have been born. Vraxxis explains in clinical tones. The Emperor isn't being tortured just by the throne. He's being tortured by what he's preventing. Every moment, Every second of 10,000 years, he's experiencing what lies beyond reality's membrane, experiencing it directly and completely while using all his power to keep it from breaking through. The daily sacrifice of thousands of psychers doesn't just power the Astronomicon. It provides the Emperor with enough psychic energy to maintain the barrier for one more day. If we stop sacrificing, the barrier fails within hours. Terra becomes ground zero for an eruption of something that would make the fall of the Eldar look like minor inconvenience. Your research led you to believe the Emperor's suffering is torture we perpetuate to maintain the Imperium. The reality is worse. His suffering is torture he endures to prevent something that would end not just humanity, but reality itself as anything capable of containing consciousness. Sister Evangeline reads the accounts with growing dread. The descriptions of what psychers sense beyond the Emperor's barrier resist comprehension. Their minds literally couldn't process what they were experiencing, resulting in accounts that read like fever dreams or psychotic breaks. But certain images repeat too consistently to dismiss. An attention vaster than the universe, awareness that sees everything and finds it all equally meaningless. Something that isn't malevolent, because malevolence requires caring enough to cause suffering, and this thing is so far beyond caring that conscious life in its presence would simply stop making sense. Existence unraveling not through destruction, but through the realization that it was never coherent to begin with. The accounts call it different names: the sleeping hunger, the attention that ends, the truth that kills, the thing behind reality's curtain. But they all describe the same basic phenomenon, something that's aware of reality, that sees into the universe, and whose gaze would end everything if the Emperor weren't blocking it with consciousness, burning through sacrificed souls to maintain shield that should be impossible, but persists through will and suffering beyond measure. This is why the Imperium can never be allowed to fail. Vraxxis continues. Why any atrocity is justified, any sacrifice demanded, any horror perpetuated. Not because we're cruel, or because we don't care about suffering, but because the alternative isn't just humanity's extinction, its existence itself revealed as something that should never have been possible, maintained only through desperate effort against pressure from beyond reality that wants, if such term applies, to correct the error of consciousness having emerged at all. Sister Evangeline finds her voice finally. Then the Emperor. He's not our god, he's our prisoner. We're keeping him on the throne, forcing him to continue suffering, because letting him die would doom everyone. Precisely. Service to the Emperor isn't worship, it's maintenance of a torture device we can never turn off, because turning it off would be worse than any horror ever inflicted in his name. Every time someone prays, they're not receiving blessing, they're fueling a furnace that burns souls to keep reality coherent for one more moment. And he knows this. Whatever consciousness remains after 10,000 years of torture and barrier maintenance, it knows that everything done in his name, every atrocity, every sacrifice, every soul consumed, is necessary. He can't tell us to stop because stopping would be worse. He can't ask for mercy because mercy would doom everyone. So he persists, and we perpetuate his suffering. And both sides of this equation understand its necessary horror, agreed upon torture that continues because alternatives are worse than any evil could be. Vraxxis stands, preparing to leave. I'm telling you this because you've earned the knowledge through your investigations, but also because the Inquisition needs people who understand the truth, who can operate knowing what we're really protecting. The lies are necessary for most. Faith requires comfortable ignorance. But those who maintain the system need to understand the full weight of what we're doing. You'll be reassigned to operations where your knowledge is valuable. You'll work with others who know what you know. You'll help maintain the lies that keep faith alive while knowing exactly why those lies are merciful compared to truth. Welcome to the Inquisition, Sister Evangeline. May the Emperor have mercy on your soul, though we both know he can't, because he has nothing left to give except the suffering he endures to keep reality from unraveling. The Inquisitor departs, leaving Sister Evangeline alone in the chapel with knowledge that makes her previous understanding seem naive. She thought she discovered terrible truth, that the Emperor was trapped in agony, that faith was consumption, that service meant perpetuating torture. The real truth is worse. The Emperor is the only thing preventing something infinitely more terrible than his suffering, something that makes all suffering meaningless by comparison, because it would end the possibility of meaning itself. Service to the Emperor isn't about faith or devotion or spiritual reward. It's about maintaining torture device that keeps reality coherent, about feeding souls to furnace that burns them to produce moment, to moment extension of existence that shouldn't be possible, but is maintained through will and power and endless sacrifice. Every prayer is fuel. Every act of devotion is transaction. Every soul sacrificed to the throne is necessary expenditure to prevent something worse than damnation, the realization that consciousness itself is error, that existence is mistake, that reality is maintained only through desperate struggle against forces that would correct it by eliminating the possibility of awareness entirely. This is what the highest levels of the Imperium know. This is what the Inquisition protects. This is why any atrocity can be justified, any horror perpetuated, any sacrifice demanded without guilt, because the alternative isn't just worse. It's ending of everything in a way that makes endings meaningless, because there would be no consciousness left to experience loss. Sister Evangeline leaves the chapel fundamentally changed. She entered thinking she understood terrible truth. She leaves knowing that truth has layers, that each revelation of horror conceals deeper horrors beneath, that the foundation of the Imperium is built on necessary evil so vast that conventional morality becomes irrelevant when confronted with stakes that include reality itself. She will serve, will continue fighting, will maintain the lies and perpetuate the suffering, because now she knows what she's actually protecting, not just humanity, but possibility of consciousness existing at all. The Emperor protects, not through love or benevolence or divine grace, but through agony maintained across 10 millennia, through torture accepted because refusing it would be worse, through suffering that makes all other suffering seem trivial by comparison, because his suffering keeps everything else from experiencing what lies beyond reality's barrier. This is service in the Imperium. This is what faith protects. This is the terrifying truth behind every prayer and every act of devotion across a million worlds. Humanity's God Emperor isn't savior. He's dam holding back flood that would drown everything in unmeaning. In cessation not just of life, but of possibility that life could ever have meaning. And maintaining that dam requires feeding its souls, thousands daily, forever, with no possibility of mercy or respite or ending that isn't apocalypse beyond anything conceived by human or alien or daemon. The sixth revelation comes through experience rather than investigation. Sister Evangeline, now operating with inquisitorial authority, is assigned to investigate a phenomenon occurring across multiple sectors. Faithful experiencing visions that the Ecclesiarchy can't explain and the Inquisition is desperate to suppress. The visions are consistent across millions of reports, individuals experiencing moment of perfect faith, suddenly perceiving the Emperor's true state, seeing him not as golden benevolent deity, but as thing in eternal agony, witnessing what he's holding back, understanding what faith actually does. Most who experience these visions die. Their minds simply break from the knowledge, consciousness fragmenting under weight of truth that human neurology isn't equipped to process. But some survive with knowledge that makes them dangerous. They understand that faith is necessary, that suffering is unavoidable, that service means perpetuating horror, because alternatives are worse. These survivors become problems. They can't return to comfortable ignorance, can't pretend worship is rewarding, or that devotion brings blessing. But they also can't embrace chaos, can't reject the Emperor, can't abandon faith, because they've seen what faith prevents. They exist in state of grim awareness where duty persists but hope dies, where service continues but meaning evaporates, where faith is maintained not because it's rewarding but because refusing faith would be worse than any suffering it causes. The Inquisition has protocol for handling these cases. Either recruit them for specialized operations, suppress their memories through psychic conditioning, or eliminate them before their knowledge can spread to those less equipped to handle it. Sister Evangeline's assignment is to investigate why these visions are increasing, why more faithful are piercing the comfortable lies to encounter truth that should remain hidden. What she discovers suggests the Emperor's control is weakening, that after 10,000 years of torture and barrier maintenance, even his impossible will is starting to fail. That cracks are forming in the shields that keep faith from revealing its true nature, allowing worshippers to perceive what their devotion actually supports. The implications are catastrophic. If the Emperor's control continues weakening, more and more faithful will experience these revelations. Faith will collapse not into heresy but into grim nihilism, where service persists but stripped of any pretense that it's rewarding or meaningful or anything except desperate maintenance of torture device that can never be turned off. Alternatively, the weakening control might indicate the Emperor is finally failing completely. That 10,000 years of suffering has degraded his consciousness to the point where he can't maintain the barrier much longer. That humanity faces choice between finding way to strengthen him, requiring even more horrific sacrifices than current ones, or accepting that his failures is inevitable and humanity's time is running out. Sister Evangeline reports her findings to Inquisitor Vraxxis, expecting orders to suppress the visions, eliminate those who experience them, maintain the comfortable lies that make faith possible. Instead, Vraxxis reveals even deeper layer of truth. The Emperor is failing, has been failing for millennia. The throne's systems are degrading beyond repair. The daily sacrifice of thousands of psychers was sufficient 10,000 years ago, but now it barely maintains him for hours. The math is unsustainable. We're running out of psychers faster than we can harvest them, and the Emperor's need keeps increasing. The Inquisition. The Administratum, the highest levels of the Mechanicus. We've been searching desperately for solution. Some way to strengthen the throne, or reduce his consumption, or find alternative to the current system. We've found nothing. The Emperor will fail. Not might fail, will fail. Maybe in decades, maybe in centuries, maybe in millennia if we're extraordinarily fortunate. But eventually, inevitably, the torture will end because even his will can't persist forever under the weight he's bearing. And when he fails, the barrier breaks. Terra becomes ground zero for eruption of something that ends not just humanity, but consciousness itself as anything capable of existing. The visions you're investigating, they're not random. They're the Emperor trying to communicate, pushing through the degraded barriers that normally keep faith from revealing truth. He's preparing us, warning us, telling us that time is running out and we need to be ready for ending that's approaching whether we're ready or not. Sister Evangeline asks the obvious question, ready how? What can possibly prepare anyone for reality ending? Vraxxis's answer is chilling in its simplicity. What can't prepare? We can only choose how we face it. The Emperor is giving us truth, because lies are comforting only when there's time left to be comfortable. When the end approaches, truth becomes necessary even if it destroys hope, because hope that's based on lies won't sustain anyone through what's coming. Your new assignment help people handle the truth, find ways to maintain service and duty and necessary functions even after they understand what they're really supporting. Because we need the Imperium to function right up until the moment it ends, need every soldier fighting and every worker producing and every faithful praying, not because it will save us, but because maintaining structure and purpose until the last moment is all we have left. This is service in the Imperium's final centuries or millennia, maintaining horror while knowing it's doomed, perpetuating suffering while understanding it's temporary, serving an emperor who can't be saved and can't save us but deserves our service anyway, because his suffering has purchased every moment of consciousness humanity has experienced for 10,000 years. The assignment breaks something in Sister Evangeline that her previous overlays only cracked. She's not just learning that faith is transaction or that the emperor suffers. She's learning that everything is failing, that the suffering is doomed to fail, that all of humanity's desperate struggle has been just extended dying rather than actual survival. But she accepts the assignment, because what else can she do? Give up? Allow despair to triumph before the end actually comes? Abandon the emperor who spent 10 millennia in agony purchasing humanity's existence? Service continues even after hope dies, perhaps especially after hope dies, because serving without hope is purest form of duty. Obligation maintained not because it might succeed, but because it's right regardless of outcome. This is what serving the emperor means in the Imperium's final age, maintaining structure while knowing it will collapse. Fighting enemies while understanding defeat is inevitable. Worshipping God who can't save us, but gave everything he had trying. The seventh revelation comes through actually meeting some of those who've experienced the visions and survived with sanity intact. Sister Evangeline interviews dozens of them, documenting their experiences, trying to understand how they maintain function after encountering truth that breaks most minds. Their stories are remarkably consistent. The vision doesn't come during moments of doubt or weakness. It comes during moments of perfect faith, when devotion is so absolute that barriers between worshipper and worshipped temporarily thin enough to allow perception of what actually exists behind the comfortable imagery. They see the throne not as golden symbol of divinity, but as torture device that's kept the same victim alive and suffering for 10,000 years. They see the emperor not as God, but as human who was transformed by war and betrayal and 10 millennia of agony into something that might still contain fragments of person he was but mostly contains, just will to persist despite suffering beyond measure. They see the barrier he maintains, though their descriptions of what they're seeing fail because human language lacks words for phenomenon that exists beyond conventional reality. They describe it as shadow or attention or hunger or simply wrongness so fundamental that contemplating it makes existence seem implausible, maintained only through desperate conviction that consciousness should be possible despite all evidence suggesting otherwise. And they see what their faith actually does, not providing comfort or receiving blessing, but adding infinitesimally small amount of psychic energy to vast sum the emperor uses to maintain his barrier and his existence for one more moment. Each prayer is drop in ocean, but ocean is composed of drops, and if enough stop praying, the ocean drains and the emperor fails and barrier breaks and everything ends. Most importantly, they see that the emperor knows they're seeing him, that in moments when barrier thins enough to allow vision, he's aware of their presence, aware that they're understanding truth, aware that comfortable lies have failed for them. And in those moments, according to every account Sister Evangeline documents, the emperor communicates something. Not words. He's beyond words, if he was ever capable of them, but intent, meaning that bypasses language to impact consciousness directly. Every survivor describes this communication differently, but the core message is consistent. I'm sorry. I can't stop. Please help. Keep them faithful. Don't let them understand. The lies are mercy. Truth serves no purpose except despair. I'm sorry. I can't stop. It hurts. It will always hurt. But stopping would be worse. Please help. Keep them faithful. I'm sorry. An apology. A plea for help. An acknowledgement that truth is burden no one should bear, but that some must bear it, because maintaining lies requires people who understand what they're protecting. The emperor, whatever he's become, is aware enough to know that his existence causes suffering, that faith directed toward him feeds suffering rather than receiving blessing. that the Imperium built in his name perpetuates horror he never wanted but can't prevent, because preventing it would require dying, and dying would doom everything. He's apologizing. Across 10,000 years of torture, through barriers that should make communication impossible, the God Emperor of mankind is apologizing to worshippers for not being able to be what they need him to be, for consuming rather than blessing, for demanding rather than giving, for requiring their faith while being unable to reward it. This breaks Sister Evangeline completely, not because it confirms her suspicions about faith being transaction, but because it reveals that the entity receiving her prayers is aware of her, aware that prayers cause him pain by adding to burden he carries, aware that he's failing those who serve him most faithfully, and apologizing for failing while unable to stop failing, because stopping would be worse than any failure could be. She weeps in her quarters after completing the interviews, weeps not from sadness or grief, but from simple overwhelm at the weight of truth she now carries. The Emperor is real, is conscious, is aware, is suffering, and knows that his suffering causes suffering in those who serve him, and wishes he could stop, but can't stop, and apologizes for not stopping, while understanding apology is useless, because nothing can change, nothing can make it better, and the only choice is continue, and ending would be worse than any continuing could be. This is faith in the Imperium, not believing in distant deity who might exist or might be myth, but knowing that God is real and is suffering and can't help suffering, and apologizes for suffering while requiring more suffering from those who worship him to maintain barrier that keeps everyone from experiencing what true suffering would be if Barony's men feel and thin, feed full brain, achieved full awareness of consciousness existing, where consciousness, full awareness of consciousness shouldn't be possible. Sister Evangeline prays that night, not from habit or training, but from genuine communication with entity she now knows is real and listening and suffering, because she prays but needs her prayers despite suffering they cause. Her prayer is simple: I understand. I will serve. I will maintain the lies. I will help keep others faithful. I'm sorry you must suffer. Thank you for suffering so we don't have to experience what you're protecting us from. I will not waste your suffering. I will serve until the end, whatever end comes, whenever it comes. You are not alone. We see you. We understand. We will not fail you even though you cannot help failing us. The prayer receives no response. How could it? The Emperor can't spare energy to respond to individual prayers when all his power must maintain barrier that keeps reality from unraveling. But Sister Evangeline believes, knows, that he heard, that somewhere in the throne on Terra, consciousness maintaining barrier against impossible horrors received her prayer and understood her commitment, and drew infinitesimal amount of power from her devotion to persist for one more moment. This is what faith means once you understand what faith truly is. Not expecting reward or blessing or divine intervention. Just offering power to entity that needs it desperately, that uses it immediately, that can't repay but couldn't survive without receiving it. Service without expectation. Devotion without return. Faith maintained not because it's rewarding, but because it's necessary, because someone must feed the furnace that keeps reality burning, because consciousness capable of maintaining barriers requires fuel from conscious beings benefiting from those barriers. Sister Evangeline emerges from her crisis of faith not with renewed certainty, but with grim determination. She doesn't believe in the Emperor as God who rewards worship. She knows the Emperor as suffering entity maintaining impossible task through will and torture and fuel provided by those who serve him. She will serve, will maintain the lies, will help others keep comfortable ignorance that makes service bearable, will operate as inquisitorial agent working to strengthen faith while knowing faith is transaction that no one should fully understand. This is service in the Imperium, maintaining necessary horror while protecting most from understanding necessity, perpetuating suffering while ensuring only those strong enough bear full knowledge of why suffering must continue. The Emperor protects by suffering, by enduring, by maintaining barrier that should be impossible but persists, because will refuses to fail even when failure would be mercy, and his faithful serve, by suffering, by enduring, by maintaining faith that should be impossible but persists, because commitment refuses to fail even when failure would be release. This is the terrifying truth about serving the Emperor of mankind. Not that he's not real, but that he's more real than anyone should want, suffering more than anyone should endure, aware of those who serve him while unable to help them, apologizing for existence that causes pain while unable to stop existing because stopping would cause infinitely more pain. Service to the Emperor is service to suffering itself. Devotion to entity whose existence is torture, whose consciousness is agony, whose awareness is burden beyond anything mortal minds can comprehend. And yet service continues. Faith persists. Devotion remains absolute even after being stripped of comfortable lies that made it bearable. Because alternatives are worse. Because the Emperor's suffering purchases reality's continuation. Because maintaining torture device that keeps him functioning is horrific, but necessary if anyone is to exist at all. This is what millions of faithful never know, but a few must understand that faith is not communion with benevolent deity, but maintenance of torture device. That prayer is not communication but fuel provision. That the imperium of man is built on foundations of suffering so vast that conventional morality becomes meaningless when confronted with what that suffering prevents. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is only war. And behind that war, sustaining it, making it possible, is an emperor who cannot die because his death would end everything, who cannot rest because resting would mean failing, who cannot escape because escaping would doom all those who serve him, and his faithful serve knowing this. Some in comfortable ignorance, believing lies that make service rewarding, others knowing truth, maintaining service despite understanding its horror because horror is necessary and necessary horror must be endured. Sister Evangeline is among those who know, and she will serve, and she will suffer, and she will maintain the lies for others while carrying truth herself, because this is what the Emperor requires. Not love, he can't return it. Not worship, he can't reward it. Just service, absolute and unending, maintained until everything finally ends and his suffering can cease and everyone can stop pretending that this is anything except necessary evil that must continue because alternatives are worse. The Emperor protects by suffering forever or until forever finally ends. This is service. This is truth. This is the terrifying reality behind 10,000 years of imperial faith. And it continues, must continue. Will continue until the emperors will finally breaks, or the thing beyond reality's barrier finally breaks through or humanity. Finally falls to one of 1,000 threats surrounding it. Whatever ending comes, whenever it comes, the faithful will serve until that moment. Not because service is rewarding, but because it's necessary. And necessity transcends reward, transcends comfort, transcends hope, transcends everything except obligation to continue despite knowing continuation is doomed. This is the imperium of man. This is service to the God Emperor. This is the truth they never tell you in the Schola Progenium. The Emperor protects, at infinite cost, for finite time, approaching its inevitable conclusion. And his faithful serve until the end. Because there is no alternative. Because there has never been alternative. Because there will never be alternative until the end finally comes and alternatives become irrelevant, because there's nothing left to choose between service, suffering, sacrifice, truth, all converging into single understanding that consciousness exists despite everything, that reality persists against pressure from beyond, that humanity survives through will and torture and endless feeding of souls to furnace that must burn or everything stops. This is what Sister Evangeline now knows. This is what she must carry. This is what she will use to help others serve without understanding why service is necessary. Because comfortable lies our mercy when truth is unbearable. Because faith based on fiction serves better than faith based on horror. Because maintaining hope requires hiding reality from those who need hope to function. The Emperor protects. Sister Evangeline protects the comfortable lies that let faithful believe the Emperor protects in ways he actually cannot. Both lies are necessary. Both horrors must be perpetuated. Both truths must be hidden for civilization to continue existing until inevitable end. This is service. This is faith. This is the terrifying truth about serving the Emperor of mankind in Warhammer 40k, and it will continue. Must continue. Forever. Or until forever finally, mercifully, terribly ends. They tell you that serving the Emperor is humanity's highest calling, that faith is rewarded, that sacrifice is noble, that the God Emperor of mankind watches over his loyal servants with infinite benevolence. They speak of golden thrones and eternal glory, of souls ascending to sit at his side, of devotion so pure it transcends mortal understanding. They're lying, not maliciously. Perhaps most truly believe these comforting fictions. But the truth about serving the Emperor is so much darker than the Ecclesiarchy admits, so much more terrible than the propaganda suggests, so much worse than even heretics imagine. If you want to understand what service to the Imperium really costs, what the Emperor truly demands from those who worship him, subscribe to this channel as we explore the terrifying reality behind 10,000 years of faith built on a corpse that may or may not still be conscious. Sister Evangeline of the Order of the Bloody Rose has served the Emperor faithfully for 23 years. She has killed heretics, xenos, and traitors in numbers that would horrify baseline humans. She has witnessed miracles that confirmed her faith, has felt the Emperor's light burning through her during moments of absolute devotion, has experienced certainty of divine presence in ways that made doubt impossible. She has also watched the Emperor demand increasingly horrifying sacrifices from those who serve him most faithfully, has seen prayers answered in ways that destroy those praying, has begun to suspect that the entity enthroned on Terra, if it's still conscious, if it's still the person it once was, may not be benevolent in any sense that word traditionally implies. These thoughts are heretical. Simply having them risks her soul. But she can't stop them anymore, can't maintain the certainty that once defined her existence, can't ignore what 23 years of faithful service has taught her about the true nature of the being she's devoted her life to serving. The realization begins during the Purge of Sanctus VII, a shrine world that fell to chaos corruption despite, or perhaps because of, its extraordinary devotion to the Emperor. The planet's entire population of 12 billion were pilgrims and clergy, their lives dedicated to worship so intense it bordered on obsession. The corruption manifested suddenly. One moment, the population was engaged in normal devotional activities. The next, something changed, not gradually, not through obvious infiltration, but instantly and completely. As if a switch had been thrown, flipping 12 billion souls from absolute faith to absolute corruption in the space between one breath and the next. Sister Evangeline's order is deployed as part of the Purge force sent to sterilize the planet. Standard protocol for demonic manifestation, orbital bombardment, ground assault to eliminate survivors, sanctification of sites where warp energies remain concentrated. But this purge is different. The corrupted faithful don't resist violently. They welcome their executioners with open arms, singing hymns to the Emperor even as their bodies manifest chaos mutations. They speak of enlightenment, of understanding finally what service to the Emperor really means, of achieving communion with the being they've worshipped their entire lives. Sister Evangeline puts a bolt round through the head of a former cardinal who explains, with tears of joy running down a face corrupted by warp, taint, that he finally understands what the Emperor wants. That the devotion was never meant to elevate humanity, but to feed something. That faith was designed as a psychic harvesting mechanism. That every prayer throughout 10,000 years has been fuel for a process no baseline human is equipped to comprehend. The cardinal dies with a smile on his mutated face, gratitude in his eyes, absolute certainty that he's achieved understanding that Sister Evangeline hasn't yet reached. She tells herself he's corrupted, that his words are lies planted by chaos to undermine faith. This is what she's supposed to believe. What her training insists is the only acceptable interpretation. But she's killed enough corrupted faithful over the years to recognize patterns. And the pattern here is wrong. These aren't people who've rejected the emperor. They're people who claim to have understood him, who insist their corruption is enlightenment rather than damnation, who died praising his name while manifesting mutations that should represent ultimate betrayal of everything he stands for. The purge continues for 6 weeks. 12 billion people eliminated, their souls presumably claimed by chaos, their corpses processed for biological recycling. The planet is declared sanctified through destruction, its contamination purged through methods that would horrify any civilization less desperate than the Imperium. Sister Evangeline performs her duties with usual efficiency. Her kill count for this operation exceeds 7,000 confirmed eliminations. She never hesitates, never questions orders, never shows any sign of wavering faith. But internally, the cardinal's words echo. Every prayer throughout 10,000 years has been fuel for a process no baseline human is equipped to comprehend. She tries to dismiss this as heretical propaganda, tries to maintain certainty through prayer and devotion, tries to reaffirm faith through the familiar rituals that have sustained her for 2 decades. But the prayers feel different now. Instead of connecting her to divine benevolence, they feel like transmission, like she's sending something through the warp, feeding it to an entity that receives but doesn't respond, that consumes but doesn't reciprocate, that takes what's offered and demands more without providing the spiritual nourishment that faith is supposed to bring. This is dangerous thinking. This is the kind of doubt that precedes corruption. She should report herself to the order's canoness, confess these heretical thoughts, accept whatever penance or punishment is deemed necessary to restore proper faith. Instead, she begins investigating. Quietly, carefully, using access to Ecclesiarchy archives that her rank provides, she researches the nature of imperial faith and the entity it's directed toward. What she discovers is disturbing in ways that don't conform to simple heresy, that suggest truths the Ecclesiarchy has buried beneath 10,000 years of propaganda and necessary lies. The Emperor of Mankind, the being currently enthroned on Terra, sustained by the sacrifice of thousands of psychers daily, worshipped by quintillions of humans across the galaxy, may not be the same entity who unified Terra 10,000 years ago, may not be conscious in any meaningful sense, may not be benevolent even if conscious, may be something that was human once, but has been transformed by 10 millennia of psychic consumption into something that can't be called human anymore. The records are fragmentary, often contradictory, heavily redacted. But patterns emerge. References to the throne's hunger. Mentions of psychers who claim to sense something terrible behind the faith. Reports of entire worlds whose devotion was so intense it triggered warp phenomena indistinguishable from chaos corruption. Documentation of saints who performed miracles that horrified even the inquisitors investigating them. And underlying everything, a consistent theme. That faith in the emperor is not just belief but transaction, that prayers are not just communication but sacrifice, that the entity receiving worship may not be capable of benevolence anymore, if it ever was, because it's been too fundamentally changed by becoming the psychic focal point for humanity's desperate faith. Sister Evangeline compiles her findings in careful notes, never quite articulating the heretical conclusion she's approaching. She tells herself she's strengthening her faith by understanding it better. That knowledge will reinforce devotion rather than undermine it. She's lying to herself. The truth she's uncovering is destroying her faith with systematic precision, revealing that the foundation of imperial civilization may be built on something far more horrifying than chaos corruption, on the worship of an entity that consumes its followers, that may not be capable of caring about them, that persists as humanity's only defense against extinction while simultaneously demanding sacrifices that approach what it's defending against. The second revelation comes during the defense of Throne World Secundus, a planet so sacred that merely thinking its coordinates is considered prayer. The world houses a relic of such significance that its nature is classified beyond even Sister Evangeline's rank. She knows only that it must be defended at any cost, that its loss would represent catastrophic blow to imperial morale and possibly to reality itself. The attacking forces are word-bearers, traitor space marines who once brought the Emperor's light to compliant worlds and now bring chaos corruption. They're not interested in holding the planet. They're attempting to destroy the relic, to strike a symbolic blow against the Imperium's faith. The battle is brutal. 3 Adepta Sororitas orders defend alongside Space Marine forces, Imperial Guard regiments, and military assets from across the sector. The word-bearers are outnumbered but vastly more powerful individually, each traitor Marine worth dozens of baseline humans in combat effectiveness. Sister Evangeline fights with distinction, leading her squad through battles that would break conventional forces. She witnesses miracles that should confirm faith, sisters surviving wounds that should be fatal, weapons performing beyond their specifications, moments where divine intervention seems to preserve faithful warriors against impossible odds. But she's looking at these miracles differently now, not as gifts from a benevolent deity, but as transactions, as exchanges where faith is spent like currency to purchase temporary advantages. And when she looks closely, she notices patterns that disturb her more deeply than heretical corruption ever did. The miracles are strongest around those whose faith is most intense, most desperate, most absolutely unwavering. But those same individuals rarely survive long, as if the miracles consume them, as if achieving perfect faith makes you target rather than protected, as if the Emperor's attention is actively dangerous to receive. Sister Superior Magdalene performs impossible feat. She destroys a chaos dreadnought through prayer alone, her faith somehow manifesting as psychic phenomenon that tears the ancient war machine apart from within. The sight should be inspiring, should confirm everything the Ecclesiarchy teaches about faith's power. But Magdalene collapses immediately after, not from exhaustion but from something worse. Her skin burns with internal fire, her eyes glow with light that's wrong somehow. Too cold, too hungry, too much like staring into something that's staring back with interest that feels predatory rather than protective. She dies screaming prayers, even as her body is consumed by the power she channeled. The sororitas' medical staff can't identify cause of death beyond excessive faith manifestation, which isn't a medical term but theological category for when devotion kills its practitioner. Sister Evangeline holds Magdalene's hand as she dies, feels the unnatural heat radiating from flesh that's cooking from inside, hears prayers that sound increasingly less like worship and more like pleading, as if Magdalene is begging for the burning to stop, for the attention she attracted to look elsewhere, for the Emperor's light to stop shining so intensely it incinerates those it touches. Magdalene's final words, whispered with lips that are starting to blacken from internal heat. He's so hungry. He doesn't mean to hurt us. He just can't help it anymore. Sister Evangeline reports Magdalene's death as killed in action by enemy fire, rather than documenting what actually happened. This is compassion. Magdalene served faithfully for 40 years. Her death shouldn't result in posthumous investigation for suspected heresy just because the Emperor's attention killed her. But it's also self-preservation. Reporting accurate details would require explaining why Sister Evangeline is interpreting what happened as something other than miraculous martyrdom, which would reveal her own growing doubts. The battle continues for 3 more weeks. The relic is defended successfully, the word-bearers driven back with catastrophic casualties on both sides. Imperial victory is declared, prayers of thanksgiving offered to the emperor for protecting his sacred artifact. Sister Evangeline joins these prayers mechanically, her voice speaking familiar words while her mind catalogues additional evidence that faith is not what the Ecclesiarchy claims. She's watched 17 more sisters die from excessive faith manifestation during the battle, seen dozens of Imperial Guardsmen spontaneously combust during moments of intense devotion, witnessed Space Marines whose faith summoned powers that helped win battles but left them fundamentally changed, their subsequent behavior suggesting they'd encountered something that couldn't be called benevolent by any conventional definition. The pattern is undeniable now. The more intensely you worship, the more dangerous the worship becomes. Perfect faith doesn't protect. It attracts attention from an entity that may not distinguish between sustaining its worshippers and consuming them, that draws power from devotion in ways that destroy those providing it. The Ecclesiarchy would call this heresy, but Sister Evangeline is beginning to suspect it's actually truth, too dangerous to acknowledge. That the emperor is not cruel deliberately, not malicious intentionally, but has been so transformed by 10,000 years of psychic consumption that he can't help destroying those who love him most. Like a black hole whose gravity devours everything close enough to its event horizon, the emperor's psychic presence consumes the faith directed toward it, and those whose faith burns brightest are pulled closest to annihilation. They can't escape or resist. The third revelation comes not through combat, but through scholarship. Sister Evangeline has been granted temporary assignment to the Order's Librarium while recovering from injuries sustained during the defense of Throne World Secundus. The assignment is meant to be restful contemplative, an opportunity to rebuild faith through study rather than violence. Instead, she uses access to restricted texts to continue her investigation into the Emperor's true nature. What she discovers in these ancient volumes is more disturbing than battlefield horrors, more terrifying than chaos corruption, more horrifying than any heresy could be, because it suggests that heresy and faith might not be as opposed as everyone believes. The texts describe the emperor before his internment on the Golden Throne. They're not hagiographies praising his divinity, but historical accounts written by those who knew him as a person rather than deity. And the person described is brilliantly complex, but not divine, extraordinarily powerful, but not omnipotent, capable of great vision, but also terrible cruelty in pursuit of that vision. He never claimed to be a god, never wanted worship, never intended to become focal point for humanity's faith. The imperial cult developed after he was placed on the throne, created by the very son, Lorgar, he had once punished for building churches in his name. The irony is absolute. The god emperor is worshipped against his own expressed desires by followers who created a religion he tried to destroy, directed toward an entity who can't refuse the power they're offering but may no longer be capable of using it benevolently. More disturbing are accounts of what the throne actually does. It's not just life support for a wounded body. It's a psychic amplification system that takes the Emperor's consciousness and broadcasts it across the entire galaxy through the Astronomicon. But that process requires fuel, the daily sacrifice of thousands of psychers whose souls are literally burned to maintain the beacon. The texts describe this sacrifice in clinical terms. Psychers are brought to the throne. Their consciousness is connected to the Emperor's through mechanisms that combine technology and sorcery, and their life force is consumed to power the psychic lighthouse that enables warp travel throughout the Imperium. From the Administratum's perspective, this is necessary sacrifice. The Psychers would die anyway, either from their own powers, from demonic possession, or from execution by the Black Ships when their condition is discovered. Better to die serving the Imperium than waste their potential. But from the Psychers' perspective, the texts include accounts from Psychers' moments before sacrifice. They describe what they feel as their consciousness touches the Emperor's not divine love or benevolent presence, but hunger. Desperate, insatiable hunger that consumes them in moments, that tears their souls apart to extract energy that powers the Astronomicon for mere seconds before more fuel is required. Sister Evangeline reads these accounts with growing horror. Not horror at the sacrifice itself. She's made peace with the Imperium's brutality, understands that terrible things are necessary for humanity's survival. But horror at the realization that the entity consuming these souls may not be directing the consumption consciously, may be feeding reflexively like organism whose hunger is so fundamental it can't choose not to eat even when eating means destroying consciousness after consciousness in endless succession. The Emperor may be starving, has been starving for 10,000 years, and humanity's faith, rather than sustaining him, may be making the starvation worse by increasing his psychic presence while providing no actual nourishment, creating feedback loop where worship demands more sacrifice in perpetuity. She finds one account particularly disturbing, of Psyker named Covenant of Light, moments before his sacrifice, managed to transmit brief message describing what he sensed from the Emperor's consciousness. The account is classified beyond secret, marked with sigils indicating that reading it constitutes heresy punishable by death. Sister Evangeline reads it anyway. She's committed now, too far gone in her investigation to turn back. Covenant's message, he's screaming, has been screaming for 10,000 years. The throne doesn't sustain him. It tortures him, keeps him conscious when he should have died, forces his soul to remain embodied when it should have dissipated, maintains him in state of perpetual agony, because letting him die would doom humanity to extinction. Every soul we feed him doesn't ease the pain. It just fuels the scream for another moment, keeps him trapped in body that should have died on Horus's ship. We're not serving him. We're perpetuating his torture, and he can't tell us to stop because the torture has destroyed his ability to communicate clearly. All he can do is scream psychically across the galaxy, and we interpret that scream as divine will, as purpose and meaning, as faith that guides us. The Emperor doesn't want our worship. He wants us to let him die, but we can't because his death would mean humanity's extinction. So we keep him alive, keep feeding him souls, keep maintaining the torture because it's necessary. This is what service to the Emperor really means. Perpetuating the suffering of the being we love, most because letting him rest would doom everyone who worships him. The account ends there. Covenant of Light was fed to the throne moments after transmitting this message. Whether his perception was accurate or just the ravings of a psyker driven mad by proximity to the Emperor's consciousness is impossible to verify. But Sister Evangeline suspects it's true. Suspects that 10,000 years of faith has been directed toward an entity trapped in agony, so complete that consciousness can barely function, that every miracle is not divine gift, but spasm of pain from something being tortured beyond any living thing's capacity to endure. She closes the text and sits in darkness, contemplating whether continuing to serve an entity whose existence is torture makes her faithful or monstrous. Whether the Imperium's survival justifies maintaining this suffering. Whether there's any alternative that doesn't result in humanity's extinction across the galaxy. The answers are not comforting. The Imperium needs the Emperor, needs the Astronomicon, needs the faith that holds civilization together. Letting him die would be mercy to one being at cost of trillions who depend on him. But maintaining him in eternal agony while claiming to worship him benevolently, while teaching that faith is rewarded rather than consumed, while hiding the truth about what service really costs, that's its own kind of evil. Necessary perhaps, but evil nonetheless. Sister Evangeline emerges from her study fundamentally changed. She will continue serving the Emperor, continue fighting his enemies, continue performing duties that define her existence. But she'll do so knowing that the entity she serves may not be capable of benevolence anymore. That faith directed toward him may cause pain rather than provide comfort, that every prayer might be adding to suffering that's already beyond measure. This knowledge doesn't free her. It traps her more completely than ignorance ever did. Because now she knows the cost and chooses to pay it anyway, making her complicit in perpetuating torture she can't prevent or escape. The fourth revelation comes through direct experience during the cleansing of the shrine of Saint Celestine's Ascension. The shrine commemorates the site where Saint Celestine first manifested her living saint powers, and it's become pilgrimage destination for faithful across multiple sectors. Recently, pilgrims have been reporting disturbing experiences. Visions that feel too real, encounters with the divine that leave psychological scars, moments of religious ecstasy that resemble psychotic breaks more than spiritual elevation. Sister Evangeline's order is sent to investigate and, if necessary, cleanse the shrine of whatever's causing contamination. What they discover isn't chaos corruption in conventional sense. The shrine hasn't fallen to demonic influence. The faith is genuine, perhaps too genuine. The devotion has become so intense it's warping reality, creating phenomenon that resembles chaos manifestation, but emerges from imperial faith rather than its rejection. The pilgrims aren't corrupted. They're enlightened. In fashion, they've achieved such perfect faith that they've begun perceiving the emperor not as distant, benevolent deity, but as immediate presence, as entity whose consciousness intersects with reality in ways that drive baseline humans insane from the sheer psychic intensity. Sister Evangeline interviews one pilgrim, an elderly woman named Concordance, who traveled from 5 sectors away to pray at the shrine. Concordance describes her experience with beatific smile that's terrifying in its genuine happiness. "I felt him," Concordance explains. "Really felt him. Not just believed he was there. His presence was so vast, so hungry. Not maliciously hungry, but like the universe itself experiencing starvation. And I understood that my faith wasn't gift to him, but obligation. Not devotion, but fuel he needs to continue existing. It was beautiful, understanding that I matter not because he loves me, but because he needs me. That every prayer I've ever offered wasn't conversation, but transmission of energy. He consumes to maintain consciousness for another moment. That faith isn't about receiving grace, but providing sustenance to something that can't survive without it. I'm happy to be fuel, happy to be consumed. That's what service means, not expecting reward, but accepting that you exist to be used up in cause greater than yourself. The Emperor doesn't love us. He can't. Love requires capacity for emotion beyond survival, and survival is all he has left. But he needs us, and that's better than love. More honest, more pure. Concordance is not corrupted by any measurable standard. Her faith is genuine. Her devotion is absolute. Her understanding is, Sister Evangeline suspects, accurate in ways the Ecclesiarchy would never admit. But Concordance is also clearly insane. The psychological damage from her revelation is obvious in the dissociation from normal human emotion, in the way she speaks of being fuel with joy rather than horror, in how she's internalized service as consumption to the point where self-destruction becomes aspiration. This is what perfect faith looks like. Madness indistinguishable from enlightenment. Understanding that destroys the mind that achieves it. Truth that can't be comprehended without losing ability to function as normal human being. The shrine is cleansed not because it's corrupted, but because the faith it inspires is too pure, too direct, too honest about what service to the Emperor really means. The pilgrims are rehabilitated through memory suppression and forced psychological conditioning that eliminates their revelations and returns them to comfortable ignorance. Sister Evangeline participates in this cleansing while understanding its true purpose, not fighting chaos but suppressing truth, not eliminating corruption but preventing humans from seeing clearly what they serve, not protecting faith but protecting the lies that make faith bearable. The Imperium can't let people know that the Emperor is starving, that faith is fuel rather than communication, that service means being consumed rather than elevated. Because if everyone knew, if the truth became widely acknowledged, faith would collapse into despair or twist into something genuinely corrupted. So the lies continue. The propaganda persists. The Ecclesiarchy maintains comfortable fictions about benevolent deity who rewards faith and punishes heresy, while carefully hiding that the deity in question may not be capable of benevolence or punishment, may only be capable of hunger that consumes everything offered while demanding more. Sister Evangeline watches concordance undergo memory suppression, watches the joy drain from her eyes as understanding is forcibly eliminated, watches genuine faith be replaced with comfortable ignorance that will allow her to function without going mad from truth. And Sister Evangeline envies her, envies the mercy of forced forgetting, the gift of ignorance restored, the comfort of believing lies that once made service bearable. But Sister Evangeline knows too much now, can't unknow what she's discovered, can't return to faith that was comfortable because it was built on foundations she's proven are fraudulent. She continues serving because alternative is worse, because humanity needs the lies even if they're lies, because the Emperor, whatever he's become, is all that stands between civilization and extinction, because sometimes perpetuating torture is necessary evil when all alternatives are worse. But she serves without faith now, serves because duty remains even when divinity fails, serves because survival matters even when meaning dies. This is the terrifying truth about serving the Emperor, that once you understand what you're really doing, faith becomes impossible, but service continues anyway. That knowledge destroys devotion, but not obligation. That seeing clearly means perpetuating horror while understanding exactly what horror you're perpetuating. The Ecclesiarchy is right to suppress these truths, right to eliminate those who achieve dangerous understanding, right to maintain comfortable lies that allow faithful to serve without despair. Because the alternative, billions of humans serving an entity they know is starving, know is trapped in agony, know consumes them without ability to care about their sacrifice, would create civilization of grim nihilism where duty persists, but hope dies completely. Better the lies, better the propaganda, better the carefully maintained fiction of benevolent God-Emperor who loves his faithful and rewards their service, even if fiction, even if contradicted by evidence, even if perpetuating it means suppressing truth and eliminating those who discover it, because humanity needs hope to survive. And hope, Sister Evangeline has learned, is incompatible with truth about the Emperor's nature. So the lies continue. The faith persists. The service grinds forward powered by comfortable ignorance that hides truth too terrible to acknowledge. And Sister Evangeline serves, faithful not to the Emperor, but to humanity's need for the Emperor, devoted not to divinity, but to necessity of perpetuating belief in divinity. Worshipping not because she believes, but because others need her belief to sustain their own. This is what serving the Emperor really means once you understand what the Emperor really is. Becoming actor in elaborate play where everyone pretends to believe, because admitting disbelief would bring the curtain down on performance that can't end without doom for everyone watching. She hates the role she's trapped in, hates the necessity that makes it impossible to refuse, hates that seeing clearly doesn't liberate but imprisons, that knowledge doesn't empower but obligates, that understanding doesn't resolve but only reveals how completely trapped everyone is in system that can't change without catastrophic collapse. But she continues, will continue, must continue, because that's what service means in the Imperium of man, doing what's necessary regardless of cost, perpetuating systems that cause horror because alternatives cause more horror, maintaining lies because truth would be more destructive than deception. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium there is only war, and behind that war stands an emperor who may not be conscious, may not be benevolent, may be trapped in torture that makes damnation seem merciful. But humanity worships him anyway, serves him anyway, feeds him souls anyway, because the alternative is extinction, and survival, no matter how horrible, is always preferable to extinction, even if survival means perpetuating suffering, even if service means being consumed, even if faith means feeding something that can't stop being hungry. This is the truth they don't teach in the Schola Progenium. This is the reality behind 10,000 years of imperial faith. This is what serving the emperor really means. And Sister Evangeline, like billions before her and billions yet to come, will serve faithfully while knowing service is horror. Because humanity needs its god emperor, even if he's not really a god, even if he might not really be emperor anymore, even if worship means perpetuating torture of the being worshipped. The machine continues turning, the throne continues consuming, the faith continues burning souls to fuel beacon that guides humanity through darkness. And those who serve knowing the truth bear burden heavier than any armor, knowledge that their devotion perpetuates suffering they can't prevent and dare not stop. This is service in the Imperium. This is faith in the God Emperor. This is the terrifying truth behind every prayer, every litany, every moment of devotion across 1,000,000 worlds. The Emperor protects, but protection comes at cost measured in souls consumed, torture perpetuated, truth suppressed. And those who understand continue serving anyway, because there is no alternative. There has never been alternative. There will never be alternative. Just endless service to entity that can't love its worshippers but needs them desperately, that can't reward faith but consumes it absolutely, that can't choose mercy but can't refuse suffering. This is what the Emperor has become. This is what humanity worships. This is the foundation upon which civilization rests, and it continues, will continue, must continue, forever, or until humanity finally falls to one of the 1,000 threats that surround it, at which point the Emperor's suffering might finally end as his last worshippers are exterminated and there's no one left to feed souls to the golden throne. That ending would be mercy for him, damnation for humanity, so the cycle perpetuates. The machine continues, the suffering persists, and faithful servants like Sister Evangeline maintain the lies that make service bearable for those who haven't discovered truth. Because truth serves no purpose except to cause despair in those who can't handle its weight. Better they believe. Better they worship. Better they die faithful than live knowing their faith feeds furnace that burns souls to produce momentary light in infinite darkness. This is the Imperium. This is service. This is truth, terrifying, absolute, inescapable truth the Emperor protects. But at what cost, and from what, and for how long? Questions without answers, service without end, truth without comfort, forever.